Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it's always a pleasure to have you joining us here on the program. Today's show is going to be, well, it's going to be a little different, but we're still going to be dealing with the human condition. We're going to be dealing with giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true, looking for those new ways of living because, ladies and gentlemen, if you just look around you, you can see that the old ways just are not working. And so we've got to find those new ways. I don't know what they are. I hope our guest has some insight into some of those as well. But we're going to be talking in a mixture of current events, so to speak, but also we'll be talking about the human condition, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, with our special guest, and his name is Terry Jastrow. I want to thank you for joining us on the program, a 5-time Emmy Award winner, a movie maker, and playwright, and so forth, author as well. You have a one book that we might also talk about, Thought is Boss. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Richard. Good to see you. I'm happy to be with you.
Now, the main focus as to why we have him on the program today is because of a book that he is talking about these days. That actually the individual that this book is about, and this is a novel. Just correct me if I'm wrong. This is a novel. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's important that we set the stage quickly. This
All right.
story takes place in the future.
Okay.
It's a novel.
All right.
Meaning it's fiction.
Okay.
But it does propose questions that are possible, and I think are thought-provoking.
Well, let me throw one thought out to you because this is something that came to mind, and this has to do with current events, having to do with early on in the current president's tenure. He decided, rightly or wrongly, I'm not going to get into the politics of it, to bring our boys and girls home, men and women home from Afghanistan. And of course, apparently things didn't go quite the way they thought they would. But when you're in a war zone, whatever does. I've never been in a war zone, but I've heard stories and so forth. And everybody was blaming the current president. And I said, this is not on the current president. You've got to go back to the man who put us there in the first place. And of course, we don't learn from history. We didn't learn from Russia and their fiasco over, I believe theirs was a 10-year debacle, and they eventually left Afghanistan. We decided, we'll show those Russians we'll stay for 20 years and then leave, and accomplish absolutely nothing. So I always found that interesting that people like to accuse the wrong people, in my opinion, and this is just my observation, of things that have happened locally, nationally, and internationally. And sometimes you've got to go back, but it probably goes back even further than that. It's just really interesting that, heck, we could blame all of this mainly on the folks who fought in the Revolutionary War against the Brits. If we hadn't done that, we'd still be a part of Britain and probably never would have gotten involved in Afghanistan 230 or 40 years later.
Probably.
But then again, who knows? Who knows? So we'll put that spin of humor on it. The book is entitled The Trial of George W. Bush. Now, again, I may say this a number of times, folks. This is fiction. It takes place in the future. This is 2022, and this takes place in the future, beyond 2022. So keep that in mind. But again, as you said, Terry, raises some very salient points. First of all, I want to ask you, just in the context of, let's say, bringing a politician, regardless of what office, bringing a politician to account through, let's say, a trial. If we were to do that, that seems to me almost a barrier to getting really good people to run for these offices, because they don't want to, because not every elected official all the way up to the president has ever made all the right decisions. But I think the biggest problem that we have in our political arena, Terry, is that our politicians, they don't seem to want to take responsibility, to be accountable. Not all of them. Some of them have. Some of them, hey, it happened on my watch, folks, and it breaks my heart that we lost these people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts in that regard? Does having, and I believe there is actually a law, an international law, that is designed to hold the leaders of countries responsible for many different things, including genocide and other words that describe the destruction of humanity.
Yes. Okay. Well, there's a lot to unpack here,
Good.
and I'm happy.
We
I'm
got lots
happy
of
to.
time.
Yeah. No. Let's set the stage here. The United Nations, after World War II, and it was created after the atrocities of Hitler and World War II. The United Nations, which has its building in New York City, created the concept of international criminal law, because the world is so there's so much access in the world today that there's local crime, there's crimes committed in a nation, and there's now international crimes that span countries, from country to country. That came after World War II. The International Criminal Court is very much alive and well. It's in The Hague in the Netherlands. And it does, as you say, have a number of very specific crimes that suspected criminals can be held for and adjudicated on. Crimes like war crimes, genocide, including genocide, as you mentioned, crimes against humanity, and other very specific crimes. So our story actually begins with the 9/11 attacks, actually, which happened in 2001. September 11th was 2001 with Osama bin Laden. And we all know the tragedy of it. And the United States needed to seek justice for that, for sure. George W. Bush was the president of the United States, 43rd president of the United States. He was the president. And by the way, we'll talk about a little bit later about George personally, because I knew him. We grew up in Midland, Texas. I played Little League Baseball against him.
Oh,
So
wow.
we can talk about that later, okay?
Okay.
But so as a president of the United States, his principal job was to bring Osama bin Laden to justice. Okay, so by the spring of 2003, a year and a half after the 9/11 attacks, when Bush and Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld and his group was unable to get Osama bin Laden, they turned their attention southward to Saddam Hussein in Iraq, suggesting that he had some complicity with the 9/11 attacks with Osama bin Laden, which never was the case. And then when that proved to be impossible, Bush and his cronies began to suggest that there were evidence of weapons of mass destruction, that Saddam Hussein in Iraq, they alleged, have weapons of mass destruction. Now, the truth is, and let's try to follow the truth along this fictional story. The truth is that while it is true that Saddam Hussein did have weapons of mass destruction in the mid-1980s, he hadn't had them for years after that. So in 2003, Bush and the United States invaded Iraq, as we all know, in March of 2003. And after months of trying to find weapons of mass destruction and finding none, then Bush and his cronies concocted other potential crimes to go after Saddam Hussein, who at that point had not been tried and adjudicated on. At any rate, they killed Saddam Hussein and his kids, and the United States stays in that war for 8.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now this becomes really important to your people. We spent Well, let's get to the important things first. There were thousands of American soldiers that were killed in that war. There were there were 20,000 of Americans who were wounded in that war, many of whom are still alive today with the wounds of the Iraq War. That's so because in modern day war, the body protection is such that incoming fire kills a percentage less of people than wounds them. On top of that, but equally as important, during the span of that war, this war created by the United States of America, the people of the United States of America killed more than 100,000 Iraqi people. Now, that's enough to boil someone's blood, okay? But on top of that, there is something called that what Dwight Eisenhower warned us against on his final speech from the White House, called the military-industrial complex, which is that unholy alliance between the military and the government and big business. Because when the US government wages war, the military goes to big business with huge amounts of money. By the way, these are funds that should be for helping infrastructure, health, education, battling climate change, all these things that the American public needs. Much of the funding was taken from that to fight the Iraq War. How much did the Iraq War cost the Americans? I'm wondering how many of our people with us today know, but I'll tell you, in all, the Iraq War cost $16 trillion. Now, trillion has 12 zeros. It takes about 10 seconds to write $16 trillion. Now, if that doesn't get people fired up, we should have used that money to increase and enhance the life of the American people as opposed to fighting an illegal war on the other side of the world that didn't have to be fought in the first place. So that was basically, all of that stuff was the stew that I was swallowing. And I will just tell you right now, just for clarity, I am not against a strong military. I'm an advocate for a strong military to protect and defend, not attack, not invade and attack. I want us to have a strong military, for sure, to protect the people and of the United States. But as we did in Vietnam and as we did in Iraq, we went over and fought wars that the question has to be answered specifically with the Iraq War. How did it benefit the American people, other than taking $16 trillion out of their treasury, which come, by the way, from us, the people, for taxes. That's how they get it. So now the question becomes, is it criminal?
Let me stop you there. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah, you better stop me on that, because I go and go. So I'm happy that you stopped me.
And okay, well, and I have to tell you, we have plenty of time, so I let you roll on there because it's important to be aware of some of these issues. But let me put this equation to you, because I have a problem with this, and I'd like to have your perspective on it. All right, and we've heard the phrase that I'll share with you in just a moment. But I'm sure you are definitely, because you have been in television and movies and so forth for many, many years, you're familiar with the term, and you know where it comes from, the prime directive of non-interference. Now, granted, that is used in a galactic context, okay? But let me ask you, weigh that against the other term that we've been hearing over the decades, in my lifetime especially, about the what's the word, the phrase they use, the exportation of democracy. So how do we, as Americans who do not want anybody to come into our country and tell us how to do things, and we very rarely ever learn anything from other people from other parts of the world about how to solve problems. Oh no, we'll figure it out ourselves. Go away. But how do we balance this issue of exporting democracy versus the prime directive of non-interference?
Yeah, it is an issue that we have to say in fairness that has plagued mankind from the earliest days. But I think it has to do with the combination of ego and fear.
Mm-hmm.
Because why it is in this case that the United States, that's doing just fine, by the way. I believe me. I love America. Let me just say, I'm a descendant of the second and sixth president of the United States, John Adams and John Quincy Adams.
Wow.
And before that, this is through my mother's father. And before that, pilgrims that arrived on the Mayflower in the 1600s. I'm as American as they get. And I love my country. But I don't love everything that every American does. So that's why, as an artist, and artists have skin in this game. Artists need to stand up and advocate for peace over war in this case. Mm-hmm. But there is a tendency to want to transport our government to other people. It's a little bit like Vietnam. No, it's a lot like Vietnam. Mm-hmm. So there's North Vietnam and South Vietnam, okay? And so in the 60s, the Viet Cong in North Vietnamese was beginning to infiltrate into South Vietnam. And we as Americans, favoring the South Vietnamese and their leaders, begin to do that because why? Because South Vietnam was trying to become a democracy like America, and North Vietnam was communism. But the point is, why does America think that it has a say in the matter? They should sort it out on their own. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. Of course, we've never practiced that from the early days following the revolution. As the pioneers went across to the West, we did not practice non-interference. We interfered like you wouldn't believe and wiped indigenous peoples out as well. And I think one of the issues, I think that a lot of people, there are some folks who get very upset about the fact that, there's a segment of our society that wants to tear down all of these various monuments and statues and so forth in referencing our history, especially the Civil War. And of course, I'm one of the first to say, wait a minute, you cannot change history. I'm not saying you should take the statue down. I'm not saying you should leave it up. What I am saying is that we need to take a look at the good, the bad, and the ugly that this country has been forged in, if you will, over the centuries. And give me your perspective on this. Now, granted, we have been dealing with the Middle East for, well, ever since, let's say, even before Israel became a state in 47. But we had a situation in 79 where we had hostages taken in Iran. And, of course, Reagan became president, and he had 8 years and so forth. And he is credited, I guess, with eliminating or ending the Cold War by virtually bankrupting the USSR, which then broke apart. And when I started hearing about that, I'm going, this can't last. Our country was birthed in violence, the Revolutionary War. Then, like the Irish, of which I am a descendant of, we decided in the 1800s to fight amongst ourselves. And that's not to say we didn't get involved in some other conflicts earlier in the 17th century, but, the 19th century, actually. But the thought occurred to me that we can't seem to go for too many days, weeks, months, or years without having an enemy. So shortly after the Cold War ended, we created, in my opinion, my observation, we created one. The Muslims, the Middle Eastern countries who are not democratic, who are not equal righters in terms of giving all people the same rights, especially women, and so on and so on and so on. So we created one because if you don't have an enemy, what do you really need to beef up your military for? And so we created it, and this has been going on now for 30 years, 30 plus years, since the end of the Cold War. Now we've got a multiplicity of conflicts, not only the Middle East and the Muslim faction, the extremists, let me be clear on that, the extremists. But now we've still got problems with Russia, so it's like the Cold War has sort of been resurrected a little bit, it's heating up. Then we've got China with 1 billion or more people. And I'm just sitting here going, forgive me for quoting this gentleman only because it's getting cliche, but Rodney King, why can't we all just get along?
Yeah. Okay. So let's. I take your drift, but there is something that can be done about it.
Okay.
And because the people who perpetrate those what may well be crimes need to be held accountable for it. And if it can't happen in a national court, it can happen in the International Criminal Court. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And when these people who fight these illegal wars,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, call it what it is, on the other side of the world, if they do so with impunity, then we're destined to have more such wars. However, if they are made to stand trial, brought to trial,
Mm-hmm.
and where a legal judicial process occurs to determine whether they broke any international laws or not. So that's why George W. Bush, when he was out playing golf at St. Andrews, was abducted off a golf course, the old course at St. Andrews, and transported to the International Criminal Court. It's all very feasible.
Yeah.
And so there's huge amount of press, international press. Initially, he refuses to testify. And over at the early stages of the trial, when he's sitting there as a prisoner, he realizes that he has to defend himself. Or he's there in that prison as an accused criminal. So he then gets to his defense attorneys over from the United States. And now we have defense attorneys and prosecution attorneys breaking down what are the definitions of war crimes and crimes against humanity, defining what they are, and seeking to determine whether or not Bush created one or more crime in the fighting of the Iraq War.
Yeah, it's kind of like, okay, give me, what is the definition of the word is, going back to the 90s. We're talking with Terry Jastrow. He is the author of the novel. It's fiction, folks. Takes place in the future, the trial of George W. Bush. And I want to go back to a question I asked you earlier, but I've got so many things rolling in my head right now, so I'll stick with that one for the moment. Do you think that this will deter anybody from running for public office if, in fact, they know good and well, let's just say that, you know what, if you do something that we are able to determine on an international level is a violation of international law and war crimes, et cetera, you're going to be held accountable. Do you think that is even going to have anything to, do you think they will even care? Because...
Well, I got your question. Let me just tell you, I hope to God that it does, or the destiny of humankind is in jeopardy.
Okay.
If people at heads of huge countries are allowed to wage wars against nations on the other side of the world without any being held accountable for it, with impunity, then we're just opening the doors for more wars. That, again, is the very reason why the International Criminal Court was created after World War II, to stop such wars. And this novel, The Trial of George W. Bush, which, by the way, can be found on Amazon very easily, sets forth a blueprint of how this international heads of states can be brought and stand trial. And if they found guilty, then they have to serve their term.
Well, this is, again, it's fascinating to me because of the way this is all unfolding for us. But, it's something that we have to be concerned about. And, we've got to get to the core of this, because otherwise this is just going to go on and on and on, and we're never going to see the end of it.
So, but to get back to the point, what can we do about it?
That's the big question.
I did it, and we would implore people listening to us to do it. Become aware of national laws and international laws, and get proactive if you suspect or believe that elected officials of your country are waging illegal wars. I mean, there are warmongers and there are peacemongers. I'm the latter. And I would just invite everybody here who loves humanity and believes in, the harmony in humankind, and aren't fearful of other people just because they think different ways or have a different religion. We should be figuring out ways to love each other, not fight each other.
We're talking with Terry Jastrow, author of The Trial of George W. Bush. It is a novel. It is, I'll repeat again, it is fiction, but certainly very plausible in the way that he has laid it out for us. And I think it'd be a very interesting read for any one of us because, they say over and over, we hear it over and over again. We hear it, but we're not listening to the phrase. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it, and we have been doomed over and over and over and again. But not here on Tell Me Your Story, because we're here giving you new paradigms for a new world, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We're here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., and we are streaming live at those times at richarddugan.com. We are podcasting, and ladies and gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough for listening to and watching these programs, these podcasts, because and when I say just over 4 years, I mean to about the middle or near end of January 2022, on SoundCloud, where we get all of our stats from all the RSS feeds that we have distributed to the different platforms around the internet, we have had 62,200 plus listens. Now, we've got probably close to 700. I've got to go and check and see how many we actually have of interviews up on the web. But we have 700 probably interviews up there that are dispersed to SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and many other locations. And that just means that you folks are listening. And in one 12-month period, and I'm talking from this moment going back 12 months, we've had over 32,000 listens. Whereas the previous 3 years, we had 30,000 listens. So it has really expanded. And you can also watch these interviews on YouTube, the channel Tell Me Your Story, Richard Dugan. Look for the guy with the black hat. Although in the video it kind of looks a little brown, but don't worry about that. The banner is The Decade of Perfect Vision. We want you to participate by going within and listening to that still small voice. We also ask if you can support us financially. We'd be greatly appreciative of that. We have a PayPal account that's for your security as well as ours. And when you go to support us, please send to the email address richard@richarddugan.com. That's richard@richarddugan.com. So I want to ask you about another one of your writings. I think it's important to talk about from this point forward a little bit, and that has to do with thought being boss. That's one of your books. It's a self-help book.
Yeah, hold on, I get it.
I'm going to let you do that because
Yeah.
we talk enormously, not only about listening to the still small voice.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry. I'm sorry to do this.
No,
There's the
no,
novel,
absolutely. I will let
Trial
you
of
know.
George W. Bush,
Yeah,
and then
absolutely. Please show it to us. Thought is the boss, ladies and gentlemen.
thought is boss.
Thought
Reclaim
is,
your life.
all right. So we want to go from survival to thrival. Now, I remember when I first coined that phrase. Maybe I didn't, but anyway, I thought I had created a new word, thrival. Then I looked it up in the dictionary. It's there, so I can't take credit for it, but I'm glad I found it anyway. And that's what we're trying to do. Whether you listen to that still small voice, which is going to give you insight and information, encouragement, it's going to help you to relax and regenerate and rejuvenate in that period of time. As one of my guests said, even if it's just for 60 seconds, for 1 minute. If that's all it is, then, do it, do it, do it. So, in that regard, let's talk about, first of all, why is thought boss?
Well, because one's point of view, how someone understands something, and the way people observe things and calculate, all of these things are thought.
Hmm.
And if you come from a point of view of survival, health, love, compassion, well being, the world can look pretty great. But if you see everything as danger and a threat and hate and the antithesis of thought and love, then you see the world as dangerous and it becomes so. So, how you think about things in large measure determines how your life goes. You can say, well, I just get unlucky and I do that. If you trace these things back, you'll find out where there's time when there was a bad attitude, or you didn't do something you should have done, or you treated people in a way that you shouldn't have treated them. But ultimately, and at the end, you and you alone are responsible for the condition that you're in. And that starts with how you look upon things, your point of view, etc. And this is a book how you do it for yourself, you as a family member, you as working with a company, of all the different categories of life. Really good attitude with very clean thoughts, with kind of, love and help for all people, can actually make that happen. It's not theoretical, it becomes actual at that time.
One of my guests once said, in response to the quotes that I gave regarding all of the choices that we have made in the past have placed us right where we are, like with you and me right now, Terry, talking on this program. And that all of the choices that we will make from this point forward will put us where we will be in the future. My guest added that second statement. He said, all of your choices from this point forward are based upon your perception of what you think the future will be, your future. And I've used the example of preppers. They spend all of their time, energy, and money digging a hole in the ground, lining it with concrete, reinforcing it, armoring it, weaponizing, and so on and so forth, because their vision of the future is apocalypse, is destruction, is chaos, is catastrophe. And I'm sitting here going, I've said this many times on this program, Terry, I'm 61 years old, going on 62 in June. If today is my day, I'm good to go. Okay? If catastrophe hits, if earthquake hits, if volcanoes, if the caldera in Yellowstone explodes and turns out the lights and it freezes and I end up, an icicle up on the hill above Santa Barbara, hey, I can't control that. There's nothing I can do. I'm good with that. I'm good to go. However, there's still a lot I want to do. So I hope that that doesn't happen. So I thought that was very profound, that my view, my perception of the future is going to influence the choices that I make today. But unfortunately, and this goes back to the thoughts, Terry, thought is boss. If our thoughts, not our imagination here, but our thoughts are focused on all of the problems we're having right here, right now, whether it's financial, whether it's relationships, whether it's the job, and so on and so forth, and we're just kind of in that negative space. We may not be saying anything, but we just feel it, I just feel it, then we're going to be making choices based upon those feelings, if you will, based upon where we are right now or what we perceive as being permanent, which that's another issue too, is that people seem to forget that everything is temporal. I don't care if it is the Constitution of the United States. It was written on parchment, not concrete. And that's why they have a provision in there for amendments, of which I believe, I hope I'm right, we have 27 of them, ladies and gentlemen. And 2 of them, a minimum of 2, are for and against prohibition. They kind of cancel each other out. So really, we only have 25. But anyway, but let's talk a little bit about that in terms of how we can, maybe this is the wrong word, Terry, influence the future in terms of raising up individuals who will run for these political offices in this country and elsewhere, who are going to think about what could be the unintended consequences if I do this as opposed to that, and they don't have to speak about it publicly, going within and listening to that still small voice. I think that many people were a little put off when I think it was George Jr. who talked about talking to God. Now, that's okay if he wants to talk to God, but you don't need to tell us about your process. Just tell us what you're doing. Tell us where we're going next and how you're going to lead us, kind of thing.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, I'm tracking with you on your premise there for sure, because we absolutely have control over our thoughts. So many people feel that they're not of their jurisdiction, that they're forced to think one way or made to think one way or taught to think another way. I think it starts with people trying to decide who they are and what they want to be and how they want their life to affect other people.
Yeah.
Most people, I would hazard a guess, the great majority of people really want goodness and want love and want peace. Not all, sad to say, but the great majority of people want to do it. And I think that what happens is that people of goodwill find themselves boxed in some way, not enough money, not enough time, whatever the culture, confronted with evil people, and it forces them down from their point of view and down in where they feel like they have to fight to get out.
Yeah.
And it harkens people like Martin Luther King, just Jr.
Mm-hmm.
and Gandhi, and some of these people that they fight for war. I'm sorry, they fight for love. Mm-hmm. They advocate for harmony and mm-hmm. communication. But it's actually a choice, really. But by you bringing it up to your viewers and your listeners, that they should know that if their life is miserable, they're the responsible one for it. If they don't like the way their life is going, there could be a lot of extenuating circumstances, but in the beginning, at the end, they are responsible for the condition that they're in, and they have to do something about it to change it if they want to.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? Because it's a fairly harsh thing to say to some people, but I just happen to believe it too. True.
Well, I'm going to share something with you that my sister who I'm very close to, and I talk with a lot more regularly than I used to. She's only a year and a half older than I am. Actually, we did a calculation that she is a year and 5 months older than me. She just celebrated her birthday, and she sent me this, and I'm going to share this with you and our listeners. And basically, if I can zoom in here, here we go. An individual's happiness is not my responsibility. They should be happy, and I should be happy as an individual. Then we can come together and share our happiness. Giving someone the responsibility to make you happy when you can't do it for yourself is selfish. And the gentleman who said that, I admire this gentleman even before I read this. Will Smith, the actor.
Cool.
Okay. And, and it's funny sometimes that there are folks who just don't seem to get it. They place all of their eggs in one basket, so to speak, in that, let's say in a relationship, in a marriage or an intimate relationship. You cannot provide all of the needs that the other person requires. It's impossible, and vice versa. And we change as we grow, and our needs change. Some needs drop off, and new needs come in. But that other person in the relationship isn't responsible for meeting them. You are. And that's one of the reasons why when I talk about choices on this program, Terry, I tell people not only that we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices, meaning we will explain what that choice is, what you can do with it. All right, a choice, I got a hammer. Okay, here's what you can do with it. But also, no matter what your circumstance is, and I literally mean whatever your circumstance is, you always have choices. The big question is, do you know what they are? And in my book, Choices, that's number one. Make a choice. But if you don't know what the choices are, how are you going to choose? So you've got to educate yourself.
Yeah, no, and to your point, if you don't know and don't understand that it is your choice. You see, let's take the subject of marriage, right? That beautiful subject.
Yeah.
So you have a choice of who you pick for your mate. But then you don't just say, I do. That's not the end of the game. That's the beginning of the game.
Correct.
Because then you have a choice of whether you love them and care for them and validate them and support them. And that's a living thing. I've been married for 43 years. I'm going to say something that your audiences and maybe you probably think is impossible, but with my wife, and I give her like 95% of the credit on this, we don't fight. We don't fight. We don't yell at each other. We certainly don't hit each other. We don't fight. Do we disagree? Of course we do. If we disagree, though, we talk about it and sort it out. Why do you think that? Here's what's bothering me, whatever. And we talk it out in a way that, first of all, brings down the temperature, right? It has that effect for sure. And eventually we find something that we agree upon. And more often than not, that leads to a hug.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people can say, no, are you kidding? Marriages are tough. And, got husbands are this and wives are this. No. That's because that leads to, I think also, a lot of the drug manufacturers, they want us not to feel well. They want us to have headaches and heartburn. Why? Because they sell their product. So that their game here is to advertise when things are horrible so that they can sell their game. Try not to take medication. Try to do it with love in your heart and communication.
Yeah. There's a great country song that's on the radio nowadays. It's called we're all in the same boat, fishing from the same hole, watching the time go, and money too. And it's true, we are, and we've got to find ways around. Now that doesn't mean that you and your wife agree after these conversations on everything. No, of course not.
No.
But you understand where the other person is coming from and their perspective,
Yes.
which, boy, we need more of that in this country right now, especially in this country.
Yeah. We agree to disagree.
Yeah, that's
And
another
that's
one.
okay. That's got to be okay.
Yeah.
Because you know what? It's impossible for two people with a brain to agree on everything.
Yeah.
So axiomatically, you're going to come into these things. It's not that you encounter them, it's what you do at the time.
That's it. Terry Jastrow is my guest. He is the author of the latest work that we are talking about, the trial of George W. Bush. It is a novel. It is fiction, takes place in the future. Go ahead, Terry.
Richard, I want to just say, if I could, not only is it easy to find on Amazon, Amazon and just the trial of George W. Bush, it pops up right away, but also it's an audiobook.
Yes.
It's an audiobook that was read by a wonderful guy. And frankly, a cards on the table face up, I like to read at night. And I would say the last 40 or 50 books spanning the last few years, I've consumed by listening to it, audiobooks. And the guy's name is Jim Meskimen, who read the story.
Right.
It's a beautiful audiobook. I sat and I just wanted to hear it. And I ended up listening to my whole damn book because he read it so well. And you won't believe how well he got the voice of George W. Bush. They'll be like, what the hell? How did they get George W. Bush to read this? So it's the novel and the audiobook, The Trial of George W. Bush, for Peace on Earth.
Yeah. Well, I will add to that I was listening to audiobooks long before audiobooks were audiobooks. I was born legally blind, and as a kid growing up in school, I was listening to both textbooks as well as books for recreational reading through recordings for the blind and talking books for the blind, which is where I first heard my metaphysical primer, The Autobiography of a Yogi, which the original reader back in 1972, when I was 12 years old, I have that audio from that reader on my phone, and I listened to it. I've probably listened to it hundreds of times.
Good for you.
And it was so encouraging following Steve Jobs' passing when they revealed he had one book on his phone. Only one. And it was Autobiography of a Yogi.
Ah, wow.
Yeah, that blew me away.
Company.
But I have listened to hundreds of books. I remember buying a copy of the hard copy of Stranger in a Strange Land. Have you read that?
No.
Oh, you should. Because from that comes a great word I love using quite often. It's called to grok. And it basically, as I interpret it, as I define it, it means to assimilate or to understand and assimilate into every cell, every subatomic particle of your being, that which the other person is saying, is so to speak, transmitting. And I had the hard copy, and I made it through maybe the first few chapters. And of course, this was before my lens implant, and I struggled through reading it. Then it came out on Audible, and I finally got to read it. Now, I have to tell you, no, I'm not going to do any spoiler alerts here, but I will tell you this. I loved the reader and the way he read with the character voices and everything, but I did not like the way it ended. It's like, are you kidding me? So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
but
now let's say this too, about the novel, getting back to the trial of George W. Bush. This is important, okay? If we could get this out here.
Yes.
People think when it's a book of the trial of George W. Bush that he ends up being guilty and having to pay for it, or innocent. I will lift you a secret, you and your listeners and viewers. We're going to have a little secret.
All right.
In the novel, at the end of the novel, he is not found guilty, nor is he found innocent. Something else happens.
Oh, wow. And I'm just going to take a shot in the dark here, buddy, and I'm going to say he was abducted by aliens and taken.
That sets up a science fiction sequel.
Is that one of those alternative endings like they give you in the DVDs?
No. It's very much in the novel. But
Okay.
I thought from the beginning, I said, you know what? If he's found guilty, you're going to piss off a certain percentage of the population.
Mhm.
If he's found innocent, you're going to anger a number. So what can I do as a novelist? I'm supposed to be creative and maybe smart. What can I do? And after a long time, way into the writing of the novel, I figured it out.
Excellent. Well, I happen to subscribe to Audibles. I've got a bunch of credits, so I'm going to go buy the book
Good.
and the Audible, I should say, because
Jim Messelman. Yeah.
I do have my own copy. Okay, but I'm going to get the Audible. I'm going to listen.
Good.
There you go.
I don't want to make it like this, right? I got to do it like that.
No, excellent.
Is this too much if I do this?
Not at all. Not at all.
Too much, isn't it?
No, not at all. Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing that, because we want people who are watching on YouTube to see the book so they know what they're looking for as well. Terry Jastrow is my guest, the author of The Trial of George W. Bush, and I'm curious, being that you've been involved in movies and television for many, many years, I believe going back to when I was 12 years old, if I'm not mistaken, if not before.
Go ahead.
Do you see this being made into maybe a miniseries, a visual presentation of?
100% yes. Although, well done on your part. It's too big for a movie. It'd be a 6-hour movie.
Ah, yes.
It will be a multiple episode television event, and it's perfect for that.
And I have to tell you that I would, and I've seen some of these, especially from England, these mini series that are only maybe 4, 5, 6, 8, maybe 10 episodes long. I am so tired of getting into a television program, especially on the on-demand aspect of it. Season 1, 2, 3, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Now, cartoons are a whole different thing. I love cartoons because I love to laugh. But when it comes to these series like Lost or The Walking Dead. Now, I couldn't get into The Walking Dead from the very beginning because I couldn't stand the sound that the zombies made. Oh, that is like fingernails on I can handle fingernails on a chalkboard, but that noise, the zombie, no, thank you. But it just goes on and on. It's like, are you ever going to bring this thing to a conclusion, please?
Yeah.
And that's why I like the miniseries.
Yeah, well, all good storytellers understand that the story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah.
That's fundamental to storytelling, and a lot of authors, I'm with you, don't know when or how to end the story.
Yeah, and that's huge, because when you're talking about telling a story, it's like with this program. I mean, I get very verbose on this program, and I have to say, wait a minute, we need to hear from the guest now. Okay, it's got to be at least 51% guest and 49 me, or less me and more guest. And yet there are so many things that I want to share with our listeners as well. But maybe I'll just say, you know what? This program is just going to be me, and I'm just going to pontificate or whatever. But you're absolutely right. And I try to stay on point when I'm telling a story, especially in this context. It's fascinating to be involved in this industry, broadcasting in particular. Because of the different ways in which things can be done. I'm also an Audible or audiobook producer.
Oh, great.
I am now connected with a publishing company that is going to have me read some books. Now,
good.
I was doing that back in the 80s with my first wife, who was totally blind. I read James Redfield's Celestine Prophecy. He has been a guest on this program. I have read Gerald Jampolsky's Love is Letting Go of Fear. I may have even read The Love Doctor, which was Leo Buscaglia, one of his books. I recorded on cassette for my wife at that time, and many other books as well. And the book that we met through, Og Mandino, who I also had the pleasure of interviewing, and The Greatest Miracle in the World. So I've been doing that long before Bezos decided, hey, let's record the books and we'll call them audibles. Sorry, buddy, I beat you to the punch. We've been doing it for decades since, but it's wonderful genre, isn't it? Because
Yeah, it is.
I mean, you wrote the darn thing, and yet you sat there and you listened to your own words.
Yeah, yeah.
What was that like for you?
Uh, honestly, I
You were
was.
enthralled in the story.
Yeah, absolutely, which is a litmus test, right? But I felt honestly very proud because it's a beautiful story and frankly very well written. Sorry, the lack of humility. I was taken, I was almost stunned about how well written it was and how beautiful it was read and what a great story it met. It was a very prideful moment. Thank you for asking.
Well, but at the same time, isn't there? And this kind of goes maybe jumps back to thought is boss. Isn't there a place in our psyche where we can say, where I can say to you, Terry, I'm good at what I do. I've been doing it for over 40 years. Stop right there. I'm good at what I do. Any thought? Have you frozen?
We lost our line there.
All right, no problem. Okay, so let me ask the other question again.
Yeah.
Isn't there a place where we can, in our psyche, say, and I say to you, Terry, I've been doing this for over 40 years. I'm good at what I do, and stop.
Yeah, I think honestly, I would think that it's good. That's really, really good and healthy to think that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know as you have to articulate it.
That's
Let the other people say it.
Sure, and that's a good point. As a matter of fact, there was a time when people would compliment me on certain projects, commercials and this and that I would produce. And I would go into some silly, explanation as to how I did this and how I did that and how I did the other thing. And I started to take a look at those experiences. I thought, you know what? I'm not going to do that anymore. And the next time somebody did it, I just turned to them and I said, thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Just leave it at that, Richard.
Yeah. Every communication cycle has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah. Yeah.
So many times communication, you talk, I talk, they never end.
Yeah.
They get blah 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 blah, and it's very unsatisfying, and a huge waste of time.
Well, we're going to bring this one to an end. Only
speaking of time,
exactly. I will tell you that one children's book that I produced with sound effects and music with this one gal, the author who came into the studio to record, it was like grandma reading to the kids. And I put the CD in my car, and I started listening to it, and I was humbly in awe. First of all, going, wow, I produced that. And then the other part of it was, boy, that sounds so good. I was able to listen to it too from that perspective, and it was so cool. It was, and I'm in tears. I seriously, I had tears. It was amazing. Terry, I want to thank you, Terry Jastrow, for joining us here on the program, author of The Trial of George W. Bush. I do have 3 final questions that I'd like to ask you before we wrap up. But first of all, again, my great appreciation for sharing with us not only this latest work, but also Thought is Boss, which we encourage people to go to your website. And that, ladies and gentlemen, happens to be Terry Jastrow, TerryJastrow.com. We will be linked to your website too, Terry, so that people can go there and find out more about you, purchase a copy of any one of the books that you've written, as well as take a look at some of the movies you've been involved in and watch some of those. I think that'll be a lot of fun for them to get an idea, a little bit of your history in the entertainment industry. But again, thank you so much for being with us.
Been my pleasure, Richard. Be well, okay?
And I
Peace.
want to get you those three questions real quickly here, but first,
Okay.
let me tell you, the listener and viewer, thank you for joining us on Tell Me Your Story, where you can hear us at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. on Sundays, 1 a.m. Mondays, 9 a.m. Wednesdays for the special edition. Podcasts are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, many other locations, and on YouTube where you can watch these interviews as well. We ask that if you can support us, we have a PayPal account. Put in Richard at richarddugan.com. That's Richard at richarddugan.com to send us whatever amount, or we'll take energetic support as well. And participate in the Decade of Perfect Vision, the 2020s. Spend that time in that quiet, peaceful place, going within, listening to that still small voice. Now, I take on the role of game show host here and ask in our bonus round the final three questions to our contestant, Terry Jastrow. And the first of those three questions is, who is Terry Jastrow?
A very decent man that loved his family greatly and will leave the world a better place than when he found it.
What is it that you hope to or want to achieve through the work that you are doing now?
Peace on earth.
And finally, what is your life's purpose?
To enjoy the human experience and play my role as in a family and in a country and in humanity that leaves it better than I found it.
Terry Jastrow, thank you once again. TerryJastrow.com is the website. We really do appreciate giving us this much time, and I hope that we can get together again to talk more about some of the work that you have done over the years, and maybe even talk a little bit about how you've seen the industry that you and I are both a part of, how we've seen it change over the years, and where you see it going in the future, because there are people out there like you and like I who are trying to make a difference. We're trying to make this a better place for everybody. So I hope.
So I have a bar. I'll make a deal with you. I've finished my next novel.
Huh?
It's called When the Status Quo Had to Go. When the status quo had to go. It's about baby boomers coming of age in the year of 1969. It's with my editor now. It'll be out eventually. Talk to D or whoever you talk about. It'll be out eventually. But when the status quo had to go. Baby boomers coming of age.
Excellent. Well, we will look forward to that and look forward to having you back on the program. And I thank you once again for joining us here on Tell Me Your Story, those of you who are listening and watching. Until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to lol.